In this video, I'm going to invite a science teacher to share how she uses tech within her lessons. With so much information to absorb, tech is an absolute crucial element to help break down learning within the science lesson. However, the importance of meaningful interaction in the classroom cannot replace the use of technology. Blended learning is about ensuring that we're able to get the right mix of technology in the classroom. It's about redesigning our learning and teaching. Research has shown that benefits of blended learning are not the result of technology, but rather the instructor's reflection and redesign of pedagogical practices in light of new instructional and media choices. So this is really important to bring across that it's not just using the technology, but it's about using the right technology for the right situation. Hi Rahila, thank you so much for letting me into your classroom today. I'd just like you to talk us through how you use ICT in a science lesson.
Okay, thank you Fatima for asking me to do this session. Well, in science I like using ICT in a number of different ways. So I've used Google Classroom to actually do some flipped learning where I actually set students work where they're meant to be interacting with an activity or a document that they have to actually read before they actually come into the lesson. We've also used Google Classroom a lot during the lockdown where work was set and interaction between the teachers and students was able to take place, and we were able to give feedback to the students on the work that they were actually doing. In science, there's a lot of science content that the students find difficult, so it's always good to actually try and make the sessions interactive and fun for the students. So I try to incorporate Google quizzes into my lessons. I will use Quizlet and Kahoot as revision aids that will actually break up the lesson. So when I'm doing assessment for learning, I will actually give the students a QR code that they can scan and access either a Google quiz, a Kahoot or a Quizlet. And it also helps students understand how they're meant to revise, because sometimes students find it difficult to plan their revision for the students. So I try to incorporate Google quizzes into my lessons. I will use Quizlet and Kahoot as revision aids that will actually break up the lesson. So when I'm doing assessment for learning, I will actually give the students a QR code that they can scan and access either a Google quiz, a Kahoot or a Quizlet. And it also helps students understand how they're meant to revise, because sometimes students find it difficult to plan their revision, that we actually make the girls feel confident in their ability to get back into their education. And a lot of ICT helps us to do this, and if we show that we're actually confident in them being able to actually catch up with their learning, that confidence will translate to them as well.
Thank you, that was really, really interesting. So how do you use Seneca?
Well, Seneca, as I said, is based on the topics that we're actually teaching them, and as a teacher we will actually assign certain tasks for them to actually complete. So we use Seneca for homework, so they're given a deadline to complete the homework, and Seneca has a feature on there where you can actually target students who didn't do well on the topic. So for example, in a class, if you have 30 students and 10 of them were only able to get 60% out of 100, you can reassign the assignment to just those 10 students without having to reassign it to the whole class. And any students that do reach 80 to 100%, those students you can then extend their learning by assigning different topics. And it's a very good platform that we're able to do a lot of retrieval practice. So within the department we tend to base the homeworks on the topics that we're teaching them, plus topics that they've learnt in previous years.
Okay, thank you, that was really helpful.
So this is when concepts are actually made sense of by the students, and what they do is they use any kind of existing knowledge or schemas that they've built up around the area, and students use those from their long-term memory to actually make sense of what they're actually learning in class. So there's something called the Matthew effect, and that states that the amount of knowledge in our long-term memory and how developed that schema is about a concept is directly relevant to how we're able to learn or remember new knowledge. So that means the more that the students learn, or the more that they know, the more they will actually learn. So the reason I use Seneca is because Seneca is based on the science of learning, and it helps students change their long-term memory so that the schema for that concept develops and becomes stronger. The more students retrieve the information from their long-term memory, the more durable their learning becomes. And it's for this reason that in science we use Seneca to set homework. So we use it both for Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, and we'll set assignments based on the teaching rota as well as from concepts taught in previous years. The learning developed from Seneca then enables students to develop fluent knowledge, and so they become experts in that knowledge, which is then built upon in lessons. Okay, so if we actually look at Seneca, and we'll go to the home page, so you can actually see my classes. So if I go back to Seneca, so on the home page, I can actually see all my classes for this year, and I'm going to share the assignments that I've set for 10x2 with you. So this is the page for 10x2, and you can tell from this page that I've set 14 assignments altogether. I've got 31 students within my class, and I'm their teacher. But this year, Seneca's got an extra feature where you can actually put in extra teachers, so you can share the information with your head of department, or if you're co-teaching with another teacher, you can actually add that information on. There's also 30 courses that I've actually saved. So what that means is that I'm not going to issue all the assignments from those 30 courses to 10x2, but then I have access to those courses. So depending on which assignments I think might be relevant for the class, I can actually dip into and out of those actual courses and set the work accordingly. So if we actually come down here and we look at the assignments, these are the assignments that I have so far. Here's all the courses that I've actually saved to this area. So I've based it on the higher and foundation tiers for biology, chemistry, and physics. And then you've got the combined sciences as well. And I've also looked at not just the subject knowledge, but I've looked at the standardized assessments that they've got available and the diagnostic misconceptions. And these also work well as setting for assignments, because it gives you extra information on, are those students able to retrieve the information based across a number of topics? Are they able to implement or apply what they've learned from the class in an exam situation? So that's the way that I use Seneca. So it helps inform me on the knowledge of students within my class, and it helps me put intervention in place. So when we look at in-class intervention tier 1, I can actually focus on the students that need help for certain topics, and then use that to actually help me with my planning for future lessons. Okay. Another way that I use ICT in my classroom is that I like organizing resources and links to activities for my lessons on Google Classroom. So if you actually look at the platform here on the home page, these are all my classes for this year. So I'm going to share with you my 10x2. So if we click into 10x2, you've got 4 tabs at the top. So the stream tells you all the information that I've actually uploaded. So it could be any lessons or assignments I've uploaded. It could be messages, notices. It could be certificates for students. All those things would actually appear in the stream. The Classwork Box is where I actually upload my resources for the lesson. So if you actually look, these are all the worksheets or information or announcements that I had created beforehand. And then I like the fact that I can actually organize the resources on a weekly basis. So students, if they've actually missed any work, they can actually go back to that week and still have access to all the PowerPoints and the worksheets for those lessons. So if, for example, we go into one of these less weeks, I can actually show you the lessons that I've uploaded. Let me just explain some of the other features. So for the people section, that will be any of the students that have been added to my class. And this information is taken directly from Sims and is populated by admin themselves. So we don't add the students, they get automatically added. And we can also add teachers into the class so that if we're co-teaching with another teacher or we want to share the information with our head of department, we can do. Okay, you've got a grade section here where any work that you've actually marked for that class, you can actually share that information. So you can actually see that information straight away. If there's any work that's missing, again, you can actually chase up that information. So if I actually come back to this week, where I actually set this work. Under that week, I will have a register. So this was done during lockdown. So it was important that we knew that students were engaging with the work. So a register was set up. I've got 30 students altogether. 20 of those were taking part in the lesson. 10 of them could either not access the internet, or they didn't have a laptop, or they just didn't engage with the learning. So then it made it easy for me to actually chase up those students. And the way you chase up the students is that there's an email linked to their name and you can just email them. Okay, we've got lesson 13, 14, and I've got some distance learning homework that I wanted them to do. So there were 2 lessons. PowerPoint slides for those lessons were uploaded. Information about their what they had to actually do for their assignments was also written in, and any worksheets or anything that was relevant for the lesson was added within each one of those lessons. So this tells me 16 students turned in their work, whereas 14 students hadn't turned in their work. And if I click on that, it will actually go into the students. So the 16 students that turned in are listed here on the side, and then I've got the missing students underneath. So it's very easy for me to just click on those students that haven't engaged with the learning or haven't submitted it, and then I can then email them asking them to actually submit their work. So it's a very easy way for you to organize your resources for your lessons, but also to actually chase up the students in order to make sure that they've actually handed in the work. So we can also use this for electronic marking. So if I go into my one student here, and so you can actually see the copy of the PowerPoint that she was submitted, and I can actually go through the PowerPoint to the different slides, and I can actually add comments to the slides using my comment bank on the side. I could also assign her a grade using this side tab here. Okay, if I wanted to then look at another student rather than going back, all I would need to do is come here, look down the list, click on the student I want to then whose work I want to mark, and then I can actually do the marking. And you can also see here there's some students that have actually submitted in the work late. So then this makes it easy for you to actually keep a record of who is meeting deadlines and who is not. I'm just going to close that assignment, go back to that week, and then I can also show you the Seneca homework that was actually given. So I've actually asked them, please complete the end of topic test I've assigned, which will take you 15 minutes to complete. And so students were given information about the topics that they had to actually revise, and this was the list of topics. So this is the retrieval practice that I mentioned in a previous video or earlier, where I spoke about how in science we actually use Seneca for homework and to help with retrieval practice, so students actually end up mastering their knowledge. One way I use ICT in my classroom is that I use QR codes, and I use QR codes because they're very easy to actually use, and you can actually use them for a number of different activities. So they're very versatile. So some of the ways that they can be used is you can actually use them to direct students to websites, videos, documents that you've actually saved for lessons, and even resources that they need to access the learning within a lesson. So for example, if students have iPads or laptops, you can actually upload the documents you need for that lesson to your Google Drive and then share it with students using QR codes, which can be actually displayed on Google Classroom for them. You can also use QR codes to do certain things around the school in terms of arranging parent-teacher consultations. So you can provide parents with QR codes that will take them directly to the platform where they then make the bookings for their parent-teacher consultations. You can actually advertise school events using QR codes. You can send information via email, which has QR codes on there. So why do we use QR codes in school? Well, me personally, within my classroom, I use them to share exemplars with students so they can actually self-assess their answers based on what they've actually done within the lesson. They can see what other students have done based on the same topic. When I've actually worked with students where they've worked in groups, especially when they're doing practicals, where it's a good way to actually have learning stations set up. So for example, if they're doing a practical or they're doing a research activity, the teacher might not be able to get around to every single student to tell them the next bit of information that they need or the next set of instructions. So if those students are given QR codes, which they use to access that information, it allows them to become more independent learners, and they tend to then rely on their teacher a lot less. Students can self-assess, they can check their own answers, they can even create QR codes for any research that they've done. That way they're able to share what they've actually done within the lesson with other students within the class, and then they can help other students to improve on their knowledge based around a topic based on the research that they've actually done. I like using QR codes for interactive labs or dissections because it allows me to give students questions in the form of a QR code, which they then need to answer, and it helps allow them to deepen their learning based around that activity. So this is an example of me using a QR code for a research activity. So the students had to work in groups of 4, and they had to actually be able to answer the questions that you can actually see on the screen by the end of the lesson. Those questions were based on their learning outcomes, and they increased in complexity using Bloom's. And what they did was the students scanned the QR codes, went and found the information from the relevant websites or videos, and they had to create notes on those. But they had a limited amount of time in order to create the notes. They then had to come back to the rest of their group, and they had to feedback what they had learned. By the end of that session, all the students within the group had to understand all the learning that was taking place within the lesson in order for them to actually write a report based on what they had researched. This activity allowed the pace of the lesson to be very good. Students took ownership of their learning. I was free in order for me to actually move around the classroom and support those students that needed extra input from me. And I was also able to share this resource with other people in the department so they could use it for their lessons as well. I also use QR codes for exam questions. So for example, I might have questions that the whole class is going to complete, but then I might have questions that are differentiated to higher ability or lower ability. So rather than sort of like having lots and lots of different types of worksheets that I'm handing out, it's easier for me to give QR codes to certain students or to all students, which direct their learning journey based on the QR code that I've actually given them. So students don't feel, well, why is my worksheet different to somebody else's? Because they're basing their learning based on the QR code that they've been given. And so they then access the learning that's important for them and helps them progress. So again, differentiation is there. the pace of the lesson is excellent and students are engaged and all students progress. This again is another practical, and here you've got something that's very complex for the students where they're learning about step up and step down transformers and the national grid. And again, you've got QR codes that are linked to extra bits of information that's coming up about the different steps within that process of how electricity is created in a power station and how it's actually taken to homes and factories. So again, the students are becoming independent learners. They're taking ownership of their own learning, and these resources can even be used when you're doing remote learning. So the students just need to have pictures of the experiment with the QR codes to actually extend their own learning. While we were in lockdown, one of the issues that we had was some students weren't able to engage with the lesson PowerPoints and the resources that were uploaded for them. They just felt overwhelmed, and that there was so much information being given to them, or they didn't know how to organize themselves in order to complete the lessons. So one of my students in year 10 who was feeling anxious, I got to know that she wasn't able to actually access the lessons. She just felt like that there was too much. She didn't know how to sort herself out. So what I did was I used Google Forms to create a Google quiz based on the lessons that she was being asked to actually complete. So the whole lesson was changed into a Google quiz where she had multiple choice questions. She had exam questions in there. She had links to websites that she would need to read the information. She had YouTube videos embedded within the Google quiz. And she was able to follow that through at her own pace and actually access the learning that she needed to do. And by the end of it, after she had received Google quiz forms for each one of those lessons, she had actually caught up to the rest of the class and actually sent me an email thanking me that I'd actually adapted my lesson to help her with her anxiety and her concerns that she was having with distance learning.